Put on a suit. Drink water. Don't drink and drive.
Game over!
Take it light. Okay?
Now you're more fluent.
He's got three!
Up, Bears.
So this is really good right here. Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. Welcome to episode 33 of the All American Hoops podcast. I'm Chris Driscoll, a.k.a. episode 33, a.k.a. the Larry Bird episode. 33 episodes in. It's crazy how fast time goes by. Been doing this since November, so I'm very happy where things are going now. But anyway, we have an awesome show ahead of us. For those of you who have either been following me or any of my accounts or have just been friends with me for a long time, you know that one thing that I love to do in sports is make very, very long lists. And with me and joining me later on the show will be Tyler, or AKA, you guys probably know him as Hoop Venue, a very, very well-known YouTuber, just crossed 100,000 subscribers last week. He just released his top 25 players in the current day NBA, which I haven't released mine yet, but however, we're going to be comparing both of our lists today. So very, very excited to talk about that. And then after we're done with that, it's also the end of NBA free agency. Really, like, the last big move was the Russell Westbrook signing with the Nuggets. So we're just going to talk about some of the sleepers that we think are going to be some of the teams that not many people are really thinking of, that we think should maybe be getting a little more props or respect or anything along those lines. But anyway, I'm a big fan of Tyler and everything that he's built. So we're so very happy to have him on the show, and it's going to be a great episode. This is the All American Hoops podcast. Welcome to the show. Joining me is Tyler, a.k.a. Hoop Venue, also known as the president of both the Nikola Jokic and the Steph Curry fan club.
Thank you so much for having me, man, and I appreciate that introduction. Love it.
Absolutely, yeah. As I mentioned, you did make your top 25 list last week. So just before I share your top 25, I'm gonna share like that little screenshot that you put up at the end of yours. Why don't you just give like a rundown of your criteria and what you focus on when you're ranking your players?
Yeah, sure. I did. Yeah, I started off the series with a preview video to kind of get everyone on the same page, but it's really hard to just hit all of the talking points in a video like that. And for me, it all comes down to the goal of basketball is to win a championship, in my opinion. Some people say, like, I got a comment that, no, the goal of basketball is to have fun. And it's like, I mean, yeah, but at the professional level, like, they're trying to win a championship. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I'm looking at a player and I'm looking at who gives me the best chance to win a championship. And that could mean all types of different variables. That could mean if you put this guy on a championship team, how much does he elevate them? It could be, can he bring an average team to a championship level by just filling a void? I think the way I try to look at it is the idea I adopted from thinking basketball is like, in a vacuum, put him on a random team. How much does he boost a team's odds of winning a championship? And so I do value your ability to elevate a better team more than I value making a bad team good. So a really interesting one I ran into was a lot of comments about how I had Kyrie Irving over Trae Young. And I think that's the best way I can kind of describe where I'm going with it is, if I need one of those guys to build around, get me to the playoffs, I'm probably going to choose Trae Young 10 out of 10 times because of his playmaking, his offensive floor raising. But I don't think either of those guys are really a championship number one caliber player. So I have to look at, when you do put them next to one of those type of players, who's going to fill in the gaps and elevate their game. And that's when Kyrie's off-ball game and his ability to do the little things starts to matter a lot more. So I think the best way I can describe how I value players is, if you're trying to contend for a championship, put a player on a random team. How much does he increase the odds of winning a championship? And obviously injuries are a huge part of that. And for the sake of just like keeping it about the basketball, I didn't include injuries in my list. And that's the one thing that I think people will kind of go back and forth on. So you'll see a lot of players who are injury prone higher up on my list than a lot of other lists. And that's because I just wanted to keep it about what's happening on the court.
Right. And again, And that, yeah, again, you kind of answered my question from the start about like determining someone's role when winning a championship, because you're right. Yeah, Trae Young is an awesome example of that. Because Trae Young, he's a fantastic floor raiser. Like, like we know he could take a team that's like without him would be like a lottery team, but then can also elevate them to probably like a 6 or 7 seed if he has a proper thing. He hasn't done the past couple years, but we've seen him do it before. And oh yeah, and I was just like wondering because like, yeah, I know that you've talked about this, and I also read this in Thinking Basketball's book actually about two-way ability, because one thing it's me and my brothers, the three of us really value is like someone's two-way ability. But however, it's something that I have acknowledged through the years is that two-way ability is important. However, when you have players like Steph Curry or Nikola Jokic, and even though they're not bad at defense, it would, if they would be bad at defense, like their offense, their like historic offense would almost make up for it. So, how much do you? I don't know if I answered the question already there, but like, how much do you factor into ability in your list?
Yeah, you pretty much hit it on the head. I think defense is super important, and I think defensive players tend to be the most underrated. So like guys you'll see me higher on historically are like Rudy Gobert, Bam Adebayo, right, guys like that. I think it's so valuable, but you kind of hit it on the head. Like, I think the best offensive player in the league, like his offense is probably a little bit more than twice as valuable as the best defender's defense, right, if that makes sense. So like, I guess the best way of putting it is like, if you look at impact metrics, right? And, say the best player is a +9, +8. I think if a player's offense is a +8 and that's the best offense you'll get in the league, the best defender's probably +3 point something or close to +4. And I think that's reflected in metrics. Like if you look at estimated plus minus, the best defensive players are typically like mid to high 3s. Right. Mm-hmm. And then you got the best offensive players like Jokic, Steph, Luka getting up to the 7s, 8 on offense. And that's kind of how I feel as well. I think the best offense is probably about twice as valuable as the best defense.
Definitely makes sense. So I think the way that this is going to work out is, I think I'm gonna share your list right now, and then right after that, I'll share my list, and we can discuss our differences and what we can jump into. Okay,
sounds good.
To start, here is Tyler's list of his top 25 players. So I'm obviously not going to expect you to go through every single player, but like maybe just go through some of the most common, maybe some of the most common comments that you got under the list, and like any maybe not outliers, but like any type of consistent comments that you got throughout this, because I'm sure you got a lot.
Yeah, sure. One thing that I think I kind of could have explained better is the tiers. That I got a lot of comments about. People were kind of confused. So the colors aren't actually tiers. Like, I don't think Edwards and Halliburton are in the same tier. That was more so like a baseline. So I do evaluations, like, and it's like a statistical way of kind of determining my list. So I'll give a player a score for offense, defense, and portability, and then it basically spits out a number to me. And so the colors, the tiers are just the range that they land in. So if your number lands in a specific range, it's all NBA level or weak MVP level. So I actually think like Trae and Halliburton, for example, you can see at 23 and 24. I think they're in the same tier. I think you can flip them around, but the way the tiers are set up, it makes it look like I think they're on a different level when I really don't. One that I think was the most controversial was my Damian Lillard placement. And I kind of tried to explain it in the video because people were like, how is he so high? My big thing was I thought it was hard to draw the line between what was circumstantial, like what happened due to the situation he's in, and then how much was an actual regression. Because on my 2023 list, I think I had him 9 or 10. Like, I was very high on 2023 Dame. I had him really high. And this year, I think there were some themes in his statistical profile that suggest he could have maybe replicated that if he were in another situation as the number one. Like the fact that he shot the exact same percentage pretty much on pull-up threes. He just took about 3 less a game because he didn't have the ball as much. Right. And so it's tough for me to draw the line. And I think Dame was a very controversial one. Jimmy was a tough one too, because like you can see on the criteria, it's a playoff-centric focus. We didn't get a playoff sample from Jimmy this year, so it's kind of like speculation. It's like, I think he could turn it up a notch again, but could he, is the question.
Mhm.
And then another thing I want to emphasize that I think a lot of people glossed over is 12 to 15 were basically like splitting hairs. Like 12 to 15 could be ordered any way, 1 through 4, and I wouldn't disagree even a little bit. It's like basically like a 4-way tie. I had to just find reasons to separate them. And the same kind of goes for like 6 through 11. Like a lot of people were saying 11 was way too low for AD. I could probably have AD up at 5 and not even bat an eye at it. I just think that part is really tough to rank. So I think it's important to emphasize that just because a player's in a specific spot doesn't mean I think he's locked into that spot and I won't hear an argument otherwise. Like, I think all those guys have ranges, and you know, as humans, we all want like the specific number. Like, this is the 7th best player in the NBA, and I think people get lost in that in the comments.
Yeah, you nailed it on the head there. Especially, like it goes like that for the top of the list, but especially like once you go down to 25, like is there really a big difference between 25 and 31? And I know that myself and like Aaron Schroeder and like a couple others, we our list go along much bigger. But like, yeah, I tried showing my list to like a couple of my friends, and a couple of them were debating. They're like, okay, like, is there really a difference between the 50th and 60th best player? Like, why are we arguing this? So like,
right,
yes, so yeah, like you definitely nailed it on the head there. But before I give feedback there, because I definitely agree with you that 11 through 15 was definitely splitting hairs, and I do have one player mixed in there. I'm sure you saw from my initial lists as well, but. Yeah. I'll actually show my list right now. It's not as pretty as yours, but yeah. Like, don't need me to graphics. Let me clear the banner real quick so you can see 13 as well. There we go. Okay, so I'm probably in the same situation as you, where I would say, I would say like one. I know that you say 1, 2, 3 are like interchangeable. No, you said 1, 2, 3, 4 are interchangeable. I think 1, 2, 3 are interchangeable. Then I would say 4 through 9, kind of similar. I think 4 through 9 are kind of interchangeable, and then 10 through 16 as well. So like those would kind of be my tiers, and then after that is where a lot of it gets interchangeable, just because a lot of this is kind of projecting, because like both of ours are similar in the sense that if we're building a championship team, who do we want to build around? So that naturally leads me to bring up some of the younger guys. I'm expecting them to project being slightly better. But however, I do need to see some of you improving a lot. Like one example actually that I saw a lot. I don't know if you got many comments on this, but like one example that I heard from a lot of people was saying, like a guy like Paolo Banchero, is someone saying he's a top 25 player you want to build around because he's someone who's up on the rise, which we could talk about him later, just because he's a very controversial player. But we didn't have too many differences, but the biggest one that we can, the biggest one that we can jump into are just, and I mentioned this in the agenda, but we can just do the three of the biggest differences were the injury ones, and that was with Joel Embiid, Kawhi Leonard, and Zion Williamson. I don't have the thing right in front of me, but I know that Embiid, we had 2 spots difference. Kawhi, you had him in 6, right? So so it was a 10 spot difference, and Zion was a big one too. I think it was I think I have him in 35. So yeah, it's a 19. Was that 19? He had 19 spot difference. So big one there. And yeah, this does come down to a matter of preference. But with Embiid, with Embiid, it's not just his injuries and like his inability to build around, but however, my problem with Embiid, like not only his injuries, but I feel like we just haven't seen him in like a healthy Embiid in the playoffs in a while. I think probably since 2020. Oh no, he was injured in 2022 as well. Actually, now that I think about like in the bubble, or was he? I don't even remember in the bubble. But we haven't really seen. So it is tough to determine whether or not Joel Embiid is going to be as efficient in the playoffs if he's healthy, just because that is part of his game right now, is unfortunately being injured. And if I am building a championship team, and if it's playoff centric, I don't want, like, I'm not putting Joel Embiid in my top 5, but I know that you're a big fan of him, so maybe you can give your case for Joel Embiid now then.
Yeah, I think it's totally fair. And that's what I wanted to talk about. I mentioned before the episode, like there was one big thing that I noticed that was different between our lists, and it was the injury thing, because I totally agree that it's like, it's hard to speculate. Like some people were like, how can you have Kawhi at 6? You're talking about a hypothetical playoff rise. And it's like, I get that 100%. And
Right,
that's how it is
yeah.
with Zion too, because I think Zion translates very well to the playoffs, but we don't actually know. It could be
Right.
like, there could be something that happens in the playoffs that just like a way a defense approaches him. And then we're like, oh shoot. Yeah, he's not that
Right.
as good as I thought. And I think that's totally fair. The thing that was tough for me with including injuries is drawing the line between how to actually value it, because it's like, it
Right.
gets to a point where if I consider injuries as like a huge part of my criteria and I'm trying to build a team, like let me think of a good player as an example. Rudy Gobert, I think, is a great example because he pretty much is guaranteed to play like 80 games. He never gets hurt. Like if I'm trying to build a championship and I'm factoring in injuries, I would rather have Rudy Gobert than Zion, no question. But it's like, I think Zion's such a considerably better player that it's really tough for
Right.
me to like put him under and then look at it and be like proud of it. Like, yeah, I think that
Yeah.
like looks
Mhm.
good. It's like, it just like feels wrong inside. So that's
Yeah.
the only reason I didn't consider it. As for the Embiid point, to me, it's really tough because like you said, we haven't seen healthy Embiid in the playoffs. And I almost wonder if there's a level of we're on the wrong side of it. And what if he's actually like this mega playoff player and we just never get to see it?
Right.
Because I think there are real playmaking concerns and decision making. And I think that showed up in the Knicks series and it can't be excused just to injury. Like there was one game, I want to say it was the Tyrese Maxey game. They tried to run through Embiid in either the fourth or OT. I think
I'm
it was
pretty sure
the
that was
fourth.
that was game 5, right? I think it was game 5.
Yeah, and then he had like
Elimination.
5
Yeah.
straight turnovers, was just throwing the ball into the crowd. Like that's not an injury thing. That is a problem.
Right. Yes.
And I think that's a valid concern. But then there's also like the injury completely took away his pull-up mid-range game. He had no lift on his jumper. He wasn't pulling up. He had to play out of the post instead of facing up. And yet he still averaged like 33, 12, and 6 on 59%
Yeah.
shooting. And it's like, if he's healthy, and it's a big if he's healthy, like, could he give us a 40 point per game series? Like it really, because he's that mega of a scorer. And that's where kind of where I think Embiid's in that top tier. And it's just like, it's the not knowing and almost the optimistic viewing where it's like, I think he's gotten decent enough with the passing reads to where his dominant scoring and his rim protection is just like gives his team such a high floor. Like it's easy to forget that weren't they 29-6 when he got injured or something like that? Like
they were like 12 games in. Like it was like them in Boston, like at the top of the East. It was,
and they were on pace to win like 65 games, and that roster had no business being a 65 win team. And that's where I'm at with it. It's like Joel Embiid's scoring and rim protection just gives your team such a high floor. And I understand it's a little bit harder to build around than some other guys, but like, man, you just give him some competent players and you're pretty much like guaranteed to be a home court team.
Yeah. All those are phenomenal points. And one more thing I wanted to talk about with Embiid, actually, and I know that you're like outspoken like against people who like use the term foul baiting because because you're right, like getting to the line is absolutely a skill, but however, there are those that are reliant on the free throw line, and though I do think that Embiid isn't as bad as like a Harden or like someone else as far as it goes for like playoff dropping, given that Harden is so reliant on the free throw line and that they start picking up the whistle. I feel like we kind of saw that with Embiid in 2023, where especially later in the series, where like Horford and whoever else was doubling him, and then he was like really falling apart. It really happened. Like the turning point was like second half of Game 6, and then it happened that Game 7, where like they weren't even doubling him anymore, but he could like sense the double, and he just got totally rattled. So I don't know what your take on him is on being reliant on the free throw line.
I think it's fair. It's a fair concern because I think it's not the foul baiting itself that I have a problem with, because I think I was always a Harden fan, and it's not because of that, obviously, but I always kind of viewed it as like, if it's good for your team, why not do it? And I understand like that it's not pretty to watch, and a lot of people would get annoyed by it, like especially like when Trae Young was doing it with the getting in front of a defender and then stopping, or like Damian Lillard doing the same thing. And I understand why as a fan it just rubs you the wrong way. But I've always kind of had the viewpoint of, if it helps your team, do it, because the goal is to win. And I do think there's a level of egregiousness when it comes to Embiid where it's like, I think the best example was it Game 1 or Game 2? Embiid had a wide open, like 8-foot shot for like the lead with 10 seconds left or something like that. and then he drove and tried to draw a foul on a drive instead of just taking the open shot. And I think that's where it becomes egregious because that's actually a negative. Because that open shot's probably a 60 or 70% shot instead of gambling for a whistle. So I think when you look at it from that perspective, like all of the times he doesn't get the call, it is a negative, I think. But for me, it's the guy consistently produces free throw rates that are like rivaling peak Shaq.
Right.
And then he makes 88% of them. It's like, that is crazy valuable. And there was a game in the Knicks series where both Mitchell Robinson and Hartenstein were in foul trouble. And that's another big value add. They had to run Precious at the 5, and then their defense and offense was just kind of nowhere near the level it typically is. So I think it's a double-edged sword. I think there are times where it hurts, and then I also think there are times where that actually is a pretty big addition to the team offensively and defensively, because if you get a team starting center off the court, they're not going to function as well on either end.
Yeah, those are awesome points. And like you said, like maybe there is a world where we see a healthy Embiid and he's relying on his strength rather than relying on the free throw line. Because I could definitely think that could be part of the reason as well. But let's also talk about Kawhi, because I'm actually a massive Kawhi fan. He's always been one of my favorite players. I usually have him inside my top 5, top 10. And I like the example that you use for Zion and Rudy Gobert because like I have Kawhi at 16, and I feel like the top 15 guys that I have ahead of him, I feel like all of those guys, except for maybe one of them, like all of those guys could be, if you build around them the right way, they could be the number one option on a championship team. I think after that, once you go below Kawhi, and in my case, it's Wemby, it's Ja, it's a couple others. I don't think those could be number one options on a championship team. So that's so that's what I factored in with Kawhi, and I feel like for Kawhi, it's like a lot of the similar things with Embiid, where not only does Kawhi have the track record of being a playoff riser, his game, which I want to explain something to the audience, because his 2024 season, when he was on the court, he was phenomenal, and people like I don't, and I just remember like when I was like selecting my All-Star team, he was like, and I know he ends up not starting, but like that, I think that was a crime that both LeBron and KD made ahead of him. Like Kawhi was objectively the better player than both of them this year when he was on the court. So since you're not really factoring injuries that much, I have zero problem with that placement with him at number 6.
Yeah, I was gonna say I remember that stretch where they went like 25-4 in January or December. I think it was December.
December 2nd was like the starts, and then like for like the next like 2 months they were unstoppable.
And he was shooting like he was playing the most efficient basketball I've ever seen, not just from a shooting percentages standpoint. He was touching the ball like 50 times a game, scoring like 30 points, and then turning it over once. And it was like, this guy wastes zero movements, does nothing wrong on the court. And I feel like,
and he was and he was also playing at like an all defensive level as well. Like it wasn't like, it was just gonna, he was phenomenal. Yeah.
And so the argument is, if I just took that at face value and was like, this is the player he is, I probably would have ended up having him even higher, honestly. But there is a level of, what is his sustainable level of play? Like he cannot sustain that over a season. He cannot sustain that over a playoff run anymore without getting hurt. And so while I am ranking these players healthy, I do also have to account for bodies breaking down. Like that's why I had Steph Curry at 10. Steph Curry broke down at the end of the season. And that's an even bigger deal with Kawhi than anyone else in the league. And so I'm glad you kind of slotted him into a place where you felt comfortable, where it's like, I think all of these guys can be championship number ones, and I trust them more than Kawhi because of the injury thing.
Right.
But I still think Kawhi can be a championship number one if it goes right. So I'm going to slot him at the back of that list.
I picked the Clippers to come out of the West this year in the preseason, because I'm like, okay, maybe this is the year. Like this is the last year I'm going to do it. Like I can't do it next year, but yeah, it's really unfortunate that we can't see that. We haven't really seen that anymore. Okay, but the last guy with the injury is Zion, and it's not that I don't like Zion, but like I think we do have a slight disagreement as far as it goes for his playoff rising ability, because even though like his game is like very hard to build around, like we haven't seen a player like him. Like he's 6'6" and like has like and has like spans where he puts up like prime Shaq efficiency numbers. I feel like his my main concern with him, he's kind of like I'm thinking he's kind of like Giannis in 2019, where well, like the Raptors, like they didn't expose him, but they really like showed his limitations by like building up the wall, and then he had to rely on his teammates from three, which granted, like it was his teammates that lost them the series, not Giannis altogether, but I think even without the injuries, I might even have Zion outside my top 20, maybe not top 25, but that I do have my concerns with Zion, not because of injuries, but also because of his versatility as well.
I think it's a fair concern, and I think that's why I made sure to mention we don't know what a playoff defense would do, and maybe that is an issue. There's a few differences between the way Zion and Giannis approach that really, because I've battled with this too, and for me, there's just a few differences that I think make Zion have a level of resiliency that young version of Giannis didn't. The first one I think is the ball handling. I think Zion has a way tighter handle. I think so when you have like a wall type of situation, what was happening with Giannis is the wall would go in front of him. He'd pick up his dribble and look for a kick out. I think Zion can take that extra dribble. Compare it more to like LeBron. LeBron would take that extra dribble through the wall, kind of barrel through. I think Zion has that a little bit more just because he's lower to the ground, has that tighter handle. Another thing for me is I think he's way shiftier left to right than Giannis. I think Giannis is like bigger, more powerful in a straight line, like a battering ram. But I think Zion has more left to right agility to where he can kind of like throw a little misdirection, get a step on a defender, and then rely on his athleticism to kind of just carry him through the lane. And the other thing is the first step. I think Giannis probably has a faster top speed, but with Zion, he can set up like 8 feet from the basket, take one dribble, and get into a dunk. I don't think Giannis has ever had that level of inside the arc, like standstill game. It was kind of always like, let me back up, let me charge at you, and let me try and hit you with a Euro. Whereas I think Zion has a lot more to his game on the block in like 8 feet area, more like Shaq, where it's like, he's going to take one dribble, take one spin, do one power move, and end up with a layup. I don't think Giannis, not that it's bad in Giannis's game, but I don't think he ever had it to quite that level. I think that's why he's always been better in transition, whereas Zion to me feels like more of a half court guy. So I do think there's just a couple differences, but like I said, this is all speculation. We don't really know.
Right, exactly.
And I think the Lakers had his number in the
game 82
tournament.
In season tournaments, you're right. Okay. Yeah.
The in-season tournament, they had his number. He played terrible against LeBron. It was LeBron on him, AD roaming early. And then it happened again at the end of the regular season.
Mm-hmm.
And then the play-in happened, and he was hunting for AD, and it was like, oh my gosh, he unraveled like 18 straight points without a miss. And that for me was like, that was the moment where I was like, okay, he can do it in the playoffs. And like I said, speculation, but I feel confident in it.
Yeah, one more thing that I should have added in the beginning of this is your list is a lot more detail oriented than mine. You definitely looked at things a lot more deeper than I did. Mine's a little more big picture than yours, but yeah, those are all fantastic points. As far as it goes for injury-ridden players, it's almost impossible to put like a set metric on how you should build around players with injuries. But yeah, the next two guys I want to talk about were players from the team that I'm a fan of, the Boston Celtics. So I ranked Jason Tatum at number 4. And the main part of that is actually part of what you said in your video. When you ranked him at number 8, you said you think that he's debatably like the easiest player to build around. And I think that's definitely part of the reason. Like if I'm building a championship team, I think that Jason Tatum is like very, very high top of the list. Like he's someone who's who like guard 1 through 5. Guard 1 through 5 is like an overused term, but I think that he's on like a short list of players that actually are able to do that with like he can't guard like guy like fives like Jokic or anyone, but like
right.
But yeah, but like he can't like he can guard point guards and he can guard some centers. We saw him do it in the finals. Yeah, he's a solid handle. He can get to the hole even though he's a little unwilling to go downhill sometimes. His 3-ball did really fall off in the playoffs, even though it was better in the regular season. And also the availability factors that he plays every game. So just like he has like a laundry list of all these attributes, which is why like when I'm building a team, like other than Jokic, Giannis, and Luka, they're like above and beyond him attributes wise, I know that some Celtics fans would which I agree, like some of them would put him over Luka based because of the defensive gap, but I don't think the defensive gap is big enough. Even though we did see Luka really get exposed in, I think it was Game 3, on the defensive end. But yeah, I don't think that does it enough for him. But I know that you also said that like numbers 5 through 11 like wasn't really a big gap there.
Yeah.
So. Yes. So do you think why I have him is either reasonable or like, and you probably agree with me that like that's probably the highest you can have him though?
Yeah, so I actually don't think we're too far off on Tatum. I just think it's the Embiid difference. Like I think Embiid's lumped with that first group and you don't. And so I can see Tatum. I think people will scoff at Tatum over Shea. And obviously I'd Shea over Tatum, but I think there is a pathway to getting there. And I think it's because people underrate, like we both have touched on the flexibility aspect of Tatum. Like he can play any role on offense or defense. He can play with any collection of players. You can put him at the 2, 3, 4, or 5. He can play in any scheme on either end. And it's like that level of flexibility, like we both agree the goal is to win a championship. If you're trying to win a championship, having a guy who can just plug and play across the board is so valuable.
Yep.
For me, there's just two things that hold me a little bit back on Tatum. I think one, and this is the main reason I have Shea over him, and I'll get into that a little bit. The one main thing is I don't think there's a specific quality in Tatum's game that is S tier. Right. I think he's good at everything, but I don't think there's anything you can point to and be like, he's among the very best in the league at that. And I think with Jokic, it's the passing and the post scoring. With Luka, it's pretty much everything with the ball in your hands. Like he's pretty much just the best at that. Giannis, it's obviously the interior scoring. Mm-hmm. Shea, I think, has the isolate. I think he's the best isolationist since peak James Harden. And I think
probably too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so for me, that's what gives him the edge over Tatum, because I think Shea has such a high offensive floor, which we saw in the Dallas series. Everything went wrong and he was still giving you an efficient 30. And for me, Tatum's floor on offense is a little bit too low. Like we saw it in the first few games of that Mavs series. I think he's a lot streakier. I think at his ceiling, he competes with the best scorers in the game. Like that game against Philly where he had 51 or whatever it was.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like those ceilings, those highs are as high as you can get. But I think his streakiness as a shooter, his lack of a real in-between game, those things kind of compound. And then the lack of an S-tier quality, to me, give him a little bit too low of a floor to feel confident in him over Shea. But like I said, we're not too far off in that I can see him up there. It's just the Embiid difference for us.
Mm-hmm. So okay, yeah, I don't know if those are two different reasons, but the reason that you're a little low on Tatum is first of all, his floor on offense, and second of all, the fact that he doesn't have like an S tier. Those are the two ones.
Those are the two.
Those are two very valid reasons. And I actually remember that Joel Moran from the Pick Aside podcast actually said something similar, where he doesn't have an S tier thing. And at first I was like, wait, what do you mean? I was like, it kind of does make sense actually when I think about it. And I was actually pretty hesitant to put Shea as high as 5. I almost considered putting him at 7 or 8 just because I do value having a track record as well, because this was really, but then I remembered okay, this is his second year being at a first team all NBA caliber player, and he showed us that he can do it in the playoffs. So I'm fully sold on Shea now, and I did have him in my top 5, and I think it's perfectly reasonable. I think the lowest you could have him is a 7 maybe.
Yeah.
And then the other Celtic I want to talk about, and maybe we're a few spots here. Maybe there is a little bit of bias in my sense here, but I do rank Jalen similar to the way that I rank Tatum in the stretch that he's not as versatile as Tatum goes, as far as it goes for his playmaking ability and also his handle, which he greatly improved upon this year. But he's another one where maybe he's not a number one option on a championship team, even though he did just win a Finals MVP. But we both know that that's not the end all be all.
Yeah.
But it's just a matter of and it's kind of what you mentioned, where in the beginning of the segments, where when you're building a championship team, not only are guys versatile, I also think that as far as it goes for being a number 2, I think that Jalen is the perfect number 2 on a championship team, and he showed us that, where if the number one is struggling, he can step it up. He's a great 2-way player. He's a great scorer. even though like his off-ball defense used to be very, very bad, like it has improved, but it's still not great. But yeah, we saw him guard Luka. We've seen him guard Jimmy Butler. So that's why I had him a little bit higher. But I know that you had him at 22, which funny enough actually is up until last year, like that would have actually been considered very high. So I don't know what I don't know what your thoughts are on either Jalen or like the mindset of the Jaylen Brown ranking or your ranking of him in general.
Yeah, I wanted to save talking about this one because when you showed my list, you asked me like what the most popular comment was. It was the Jaylen Brown placement.
Really?
Because they were like, how can you have the finals MVP so low? They were all thinking I should have him top 15, things like that. And
I love that.
I want to emphasize I did get much higher on him this year. I actually last 2 years I didn't even have him on my top 25.
I remember that. Yeah.
This was my first year having him on the list, and I think it's because some of the improvements you mentioned. The off-ball defense really improved. I was so impressed with the end of game one. Both of his plays at the rim, S tier, masterclass of off-ball defense. And then, like you said, the ability to guard Luka, the ability to switch across the board. I've been high on Jalen's man defense since he was guarding Siakam in the bubble. That's when I was like, yeah, this guy's a serious man defender.
Yep.
So I've always been high on that. The off-ball defense improved. And then I also think his processing as a playmaker improved a little bit with the handle to just make him a much better offensive player, more complete. I just have one bone to pick, or I guess you could say two, with Jalen that is more so not a definitive, like this is why I'm lower on him, more so a question mark in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Because I will say I'm absolutely higher on the Celtics 3, 4, 5, 6 than probably anyone. So it's not like I'm saying, oh, like Jalen's lower, the Celtics are actually worse than you think. I just think the 3, 4, 5, 6 don't get enough credit. For me, what's tough with Jalen is, in my opinion, in their starting five throughout the playoffs. So not the Porzingis lineup, but with Horford.
Right.
I think you could argue he was both the worst passer and shooter in that starting five. And I don't know if there's another team in NBA history where that exists. And that's my gripe. Like Jalen's a very streaky shooter. He only shot like over the last 3 seasons, he's only shot like 36% on catch and shoot threes, I think, which is below league average. And then the pull-up three comes and goes like 34%, I think. And then on open threes, he was the only Celtic this year to shoot below 40% on open threes across the board. That includes Hauser, Pritchard, Porzingis, Horford. So I think he's noticeably, statistically, the worst three-point shooter. And then the passing is more so an opinionated thing. Like I think Horford's always been underrated as a passer, but obviously he doesn't create much. So you could give me that argument for Jalen. Like Horford doesn't really pass much because he doesn't create. And that's my thing. So I don't know how I'd feel about Jalen without this like ideal 5 out where he can kind of, all of the reads are kind of made for him, like drive, draw the defender, kick it to the corner, and then it's like a domino effect. I don't know if you get him in a situation like you had him, I think you had him one spot ahead of Devin Booker.
Correct.
Like, I don't know if you could put him in a situation like the Suns, replace Booker, and expect him to carry that level of offensive load without being a turnover machine. And that's what worries me.
And I think and that is a valid take, and I think it would have been an even more valid take last year when his turnover was like not his turnover, when his handle was up there as one of the worst in the league. So, those are all very valid points. And that's why number twos are always very hard to because always like number twos are always harder to rank just because their flaws are always like they're always kind of hidden. So like I said, like my thing with Jalen is he did prove to be extremely consistent overall in his game, which is why he did end up winning Finals MVP, because I know that you tweeted out like a couple of days after the finals that even though like Tatum put up the better stats, like he had the more points, rebounds, and assists, they won games 1 and 2 because of Jalen. And and like the series, like by no means is the series over when it's 2-0, but it definitely is a big momentum speaker and
it set the tone.
Sets the tone. Yeah. That's exactly what I was like. You took the words out of my mouth. Exactly what I was looking for. But I guess the last two guys that I wanted to talk about, we could talk about more after this. But like the last two guys in particular are the Celtics rivals, Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. So I've always been pretty high on Jimmy. But I guess this year when we didn't see him really play in the playoffs, and also when we saw him, it's like, and let me start over. Yes, so like my thing with Jimmy is like being a playoff riser is awesome, and like being someone who can elevate your game in the playoffs is awesome. When you're actually not doing that, like whether it's because you're injured or it's because you're doing something else, I just get turned off by that big time, and that's why I start him lower and I can't put him any higher due to speculation. So, and as far as it goes for Bam, I don't really have an issue with Bam either way. Like maybe it's because of his offensive limitations, which maybe I'm underestimating his offensive limitations. But I don't know what your take is on those two players or the Miami Heat in general. So like, yeah, maybe want to explain a little bit. Like you obviously gave a good explanation in your videos. Like but yeah, maybe want to explain your takes on those two players.
Yeah, I think the Jimmy point is totally fair. And like, I wouldn't fault anyone for even having him out of the top 25. Cause like you said, you start him kind of lower because you're anticipating a rise. And then when it doesn't happen because he's injured, it's like, well, would he have risen or was this the year that he fell off? Like, you don't actually know.
Right.
Totally fair. And I think actually a big point on Jimmy to be lower on him would be, I think his regular seasons for a couple of years now have been incredibly underrated. Like he probably should have ended up on some All-NBA teams. Like I remember last year specifically.
Last year, I thought like I had him on second team All-NBA. I don't think he didn't even make third team All-NBA. If I'm not mistaken. 2023,
he was like plus 6 or 7% efficiency.
Yeah,
while like top 5 in steals, averaging 24, 7, and 5 a game. Like that's a great season.
And and I know that like this stat isn't really perfect, or it's not a really good stat either. But like you finished top 7 in PER, which like. Yeah. Which like almost all players, like as long as they're in the position, like if you're like top 10 in PER, you're going to make an All-NBA team, and that just didn't happen to him.
And I think it's because people kind of made it up in their minds, like, oh, he doesn't take the regular season seriously. But like, right. And then of course in the first round of the playoffs, he averaged like 37, and it was like, oh, that's why we didn't. But then I think people revise history, and they're like, yeah, he just wasn't trying in the regular. Like he had an amazing regular season. I think it's fair to compare regular seasons. And I think this year was a clear regression, which is kind of what I focused my profile on him in my video, was his rim attempts were like the lowest in like 6 years. His free throw attempts were the lowest in like 5 years. His forced turnovers were the lowest since like 2016. And so all of these statistical signals suggest this was just a noticeably worse regular season. So one can make the argument, was he coasting even more than before, or did he actually regress?
Right.
And I think he actually regressed. I think this was the year that he actually regressed. And so I had him like 12th maybe in 2023. I got him down to 17th. And it's because like I said, I speculated. I think I added the drop off, and then I accounted for the fact that I still think he would elevate in the playoffs.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah.
But in that same line of thinking, him regressing like that, and the Heat remaining a near 50-win team, to me speaks to Bam's improvements, which is why I was so high on Bam. I think Bam improved offensively. I think what I mentioned in my video was he's always had the pick and roll game. He's always had the passing. He's always had like the dribble handoff hub type of thing. He felt like a legitimate post scorer this year, especially in the first round against Boston. Like I know, was it game 2? I know you game 2 killed you watching that guy take fall away jumper after fall away jumper. Like that was a legit scoring presence. Like that looked serious. And
and like not only game 2 of that series, but like I'm also thinking in 2023 as well. Like games 1, 2, and 3. Like is like where I really understand where people is what I started to understand where people have Bam higher. Like he's a bully on on the boards. Like truly takes advantage of every opportunity he has. And yeah, and people always talk about his versatility in defense. It kind of takes away from the fact of how elite he is at the rim as well.
Yeah, and so my thing with Bam is, I think situationally, I don't think I actually would argue he's in one of the worst possible situations for his offense, because it's kind of like the Wembanyama argument. Like Wembanyama wasn't playing with guys who could hit him in his spots at the rim and things like that, like couldn't hit him on lobs. And so you kind of have to take the efficiency with a grain of salt. I think there's a similar thing going on with Bam, where it's like, imagine how much differently we'd talk about his offense if he was just playing with a Steph Curry, Damian Lillard, Trae Young type of playmaker. It's like a short roll guy who can attack or use the mid-range or get above the rim on lobs. And the offense is only just like the cherry on top to like maybe the 3rd or 4th best defender in the league. So for me, the Bam thing is like, I view his offense as a strong positive. And I view his defense like I don't know. I noticed you had Wembanyama ahead of Bam. And I would say I view Bam as a better defensive player than Wembanyama.
Oh, really? Okay.
Right now, in the playoffs, I should specify. In the playoffs, because I think Wemby has his own issues that would come up in the playoffs that, like, obviously we didn't see they were a 20-win team. And I think Bam is kind of playoff proof. And I think that's why Miami, obviously they have genius coaching, genius scheming, but like the way they bottle up these elite offenses with Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, guys like that on the floor, like that's a testament to Bam. That's a testament to Bam. And I think so, in my opinion, I had him as the third best defender in the NBA last season behind AD and Gobert.
Right.
And so I think number 3 defense to go along with strong positive offense to me is just like kind of what we started talking about with the two-way ability. It just kind of makes up the ground on a lot of these offensive guys to me.
It's funny you bring up Wemby, actually, just because, like, I know people are ready to like rank, to put him on a pedestal, which understandably so. He's an extremely exciting player to watch. And the fact that he averaged nearly 4 blocks a game this year.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was you or if it was someone else that said, like, there's a very high chance that, like, this will be, like, Wemby's never going to have this many blocks per game again, just because he's going to have to be a lot more disciplined on defense, to where he's not going to be, he's not going to be attempting to block as many shots. And obviously not many, they know who he is now. So they're going to be a little more hesitant to drive to the hoop as well. So but like, yeah, I know you addressed it in your video as well. Like his ability to bite on too many things, like his overall discipline defense. So yeah, I have zero issue if you want to put Bam ahead of Wemby there.
Yeah, my thing with Wemby is I was the one who tweeted that, where I said typically historically, like, the greatest rim protectors don't actually peak as rim protectors when their block numbers peak. I think the best example is Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid averaged almost 3 blocks a game as a rookie. Now he's under 2. And I'd say he's a considerably better rim protector than he was as a rookie. And it's because of, like what you said, not biting on fakes, knowing when to just be in the right spot without actually trying to block it, just putting your body there. I think Wemby goes for the block every single time, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I compare it to Gobert. I think people already view Wemby as a Gobert level rim protector, when I just don't think he is. And I think it's the like positional IQ, not biting. I don't think I've ever seen Gobert bite on a pump fake before. And Wemby bites on like 5 a game. And that's the difference for me, separating Gobert from a Wemby. And I think Wemby has I would honestly say, and this is probably a hot take to most people, I think Gobert is at this point a noticeably better isolation defender on the perimeter than Wemby.
I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's a bad take at all. No.
Yeah, I don't think it's but I think in the general consensus, people are like, Wemby's more fluid, he's longer, and like Gobert has those low lights. No one's going to make a low light compilation of Wemby. He's too universally loved. Rightfully so, like you said. Yeah. But I think Wemby has his issues on the perimeter, and because he's not, in my opinion, a Gobert level rim protector, it's just like a notch below that top tier defender. I'd say he's like a top 5 argument type of defender.
Right. Awesome. So, but yeah, before we move on to the sleepers, was there anything else that you wanted to like pick a bone with my list? I'll share it again, but I know you probably have it in front of you as well. But yeah, anything else that you wanted? Any other interesting thoughts that you had?
I think we're pretty much on the same page with a lot of the placements. Like Maxey at 24, I had him just off my list. Like I said, 22 to like you said 22 to 31 or whatever. Not too big of a difference. It's kind of just you got to cut it down to a number of 25. I actually did end up ranking like 70 players, but I can't make a video on 70 players. But the John Morant thing is too. I would have John Morant probably 15 or 16 on my list, but I didn't rank him because he only played 9 games.
Of course, yeah.
So I think for the most part, like you're a little bit higher on Fox and a little bit lower on Bam, but for the most part, like we kind of are on the same line of thinking, just a slight difference in criteria with the injury thing.
Right, exactly. Awesome. Okay, so yes. So I guess the last thing I want to talk about, so as I mentioned in my monologue, that we're at the end of free agency now, so people are starting to make their standings. So we could start out east. So what team out east are you expecting to jump the most or overachieve the most to like the general population right now?
Yeah, it's interesting because when you ask me like sleepers, I don't think the league is set up in a way right now where we'll have like a sleeper contender, like a dark horse contender. I don't think the league is structured right now, but there are a few teams so I would say the big four in the East, and I'm pretty sure we agree on this, is Boston, Philly, Milwaukee, and New York. I think we kind of agree on that. And I think the Hartenstein loss is actually going to be a bigger deal than people are making it.
100% is, yeah.
And so to me, that took New York from 2 to 4 in the East hierarchy. But after that, like, there are some really good playoff teams that I don't know if they can win a series, and that would be Indiana. Obviously, Indiana beat New York last year, but we all know there were circumstances with that.
Yeah.
Orlando's another one. Like, Orlando's a young team. They're on the come up. We could see a leap from both Paolo and Franz that makes them really interesting. But again, I don't think KCP is the move that pushes them over the hump. Cleveland's still going to be in the mix, but again, I don't know what to do with them. Miami with Ware, again, in the mix, but I don't like their offense enough to do anything serious in the playoffs. So yeah, for me in the East, I don't know if there's anything really that I'm expecting to kind of like shock people.
Yeah, I agree with that. I did like your take on the Magic though, and you brought up Paolo, which I'm sure you saw the discussions around Paolo versus Paul George. I love Paolo. I'm someone. Yeah, I actually ranked him in my like inside my top 30 heading into last year. Like, I really think he has a ton of potential. I just think, I think he can be so much better. Like, I think he has a very high ceiling, but his shot selection, his inefficiency, he's a good defender. I think he's a high ceiling, but I think we saw him throughout the year where like we saw that he has a pretty low floor right now. Like, I think his floor is going to become much higher as he matures, as his game becomes more polished. But right now, I don't think there's an argument for him really being in the top 25 or someone that can like lead his team to like multiple playoff series wins.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this happens with every young star. I think it happened with Ant. I think it happened with Ja.
Yep.
I think when young stars,
honestly,
when young stars are on the rise, it's we get obsessed with the idea of them before they actually actualize. Yes. And so for me, Ant, I was always low on Ant, but I was always high on his potential. I was always like, just wait for it to come to fruition, and then everyone will be on the same page. And I think the same thing's happening with Paolo. I think the biggest issue isn't even the shooting efficiency, it's the turnovers. Like, even in that Cleveland series, he had like an 8 turnover game. And there's just like a lot of boneheaded mistakes. And then the problem is people will look at those 6 games, or it was a 7-game series. They'll look at those 7 games and be like, he proved he can do it in the playoffs. The problem for me is 7 games isn't a good enough sample to draw anything from. And he shot like 60% on long twos. So there's no way people think that's a sustainable performance. Mm-hmm. And so I come off as negative and like being low on Paolo. And I understand that, but it's because I feel like people are obsessed with the idea of him before letting him actualize. So if I'm trying to rank players as who's going to give me the best chance to win a championship last year, I don't think Paolo's in that discussion yet. But if we're talking about projecting for next year, like, I'm very high on improvements Paolo can make and ways he can influence the game. I think of him as like the future. I have a video called Paolo Banchero is the future of basketball. So if if you think I'm low on him after making a video with that title, I don't know what to tell you. And it's just like I said, I had the reputation of being low on Ant, low on Ja, low on Trae Young, all these guys. And it's like, let them actualize, and that's my thing with Paolo. Yes,
and the same thing happened with me with Jalen Brunson, actually, because like Knicks fans were like he had a great few weeks like last year. Like, they're like, oh, he's already better than Trae. I'm like, he's not better than Trae yet. And then he turned out to be better than Trae. They're like, oh, you're wrong. I'm like, no, I was not wrong. He just became better than Trae 5 minutes ago. Like, I was not wrong. Like, so yeah, I 100% agree there. I would, however, be careful when you say like a lot of those teams can't win a playoff series because we know how the NBA works. A lot of it factors in luck because
sure.
Pacers were an 11 seed 2 years ago. Then they made the conference finals. So like a lot of it is going to come down to luck, and I can definitely see an Orlando or especially the Heats coming back to the conference finals next year. The West is a little more interesting just because like I was making my list the other day of standings. I was like, this can like so much can happen in between now and then because like because I thought like, okay, the Suns were the 6th seed last year. They can be better. I don't know if they will be better. The Grizzlies were the 2 seed 2 years ago. Can they go back to being the 2 seed? I think they can. Will they though? So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know where your thoughts are out west now.
Well, the main one I would want to start with is Denver because I think people kind of threw them into the back burner where it's like, as long as they still have that top four of Jokic, Murray, Porter, and Gordon, they are a tier 1 contender. Like, I know the other pieces matter and depth really matters. That starting shooting guard really matters. But like in the grand scheme of things, those 4 are going to put you in a position to compete for a championship every time. And I think people are really underrating that. Like, I've seen discussions of like, they're failing Jokic, and like, sure, maybe it's not the ideal roster, but they're definitely good enough to win a championship still. And I think people need to address that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Clippers are a little bit underrated, but again, it's like hypothetical Kawhi. Is he actually going to be in the playoffs? Is he actually going to play 60, 70 games? I think they're pretty much going to be every bit as good as last year. And it's will they play enough games? That's really all it comes down to for me. The Kings, I think, are slept on as a regular season team. I think the roster they've put together is a 50-win threat. I wouldn't be surprised if they enter the playoffs with home court. But if we're talking playoff contenders, I wouldn't probably have them as a top 7 or 8 team in the West. And that's just because I have some concerns with the way they play on both ends of the floor compared to like I think they'll definitely win more games than the Lakers. Would I take them over the Lakers in a playoff series? No.
Right.
And that's the tough one. You mentioned the Grizzlies. I'm always high on the Grizzlies every year.
Me too.
I had them in the conference finals the year they lost to the Lakers in the first round. I think that was 2 years ago.
I'm pretty sure I did too. If I'm mistaken.
Yeah, I had them making the conference finals. I'm high on Ja, Bane, and Jaren, all 3 of them. I think Edey replaces a lot of what Steven Adams was doing with the screen setting, but he also adds a new layer to their offense, a dominant post scorer.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be interesting. He's also a big time rim protector and drop defender, which next to Jaren at the 4 will be good. And then of course GG Jackson looked awesome last year. Vince Williams is really good.
Yeah, smart.
They've got a lot going, and they're really young. They're explosive. I could see them making some noise. And then the last one I thought about as a sleeper, it kind of doesn't fit the definition, but the Thunder, I think they're slept on in terms of how dominant they could be.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if they unravel a Celtics type of season from last year, like where they just win like 64, 65 games. They're a top 3 offense and defense because I think they were 0.4 points. Sorry, what were you saying?
Oh no! Like I was going to say, like they were already the 1 seed last year.
Yeah.
It's because they lost in the second round is why people like don't remember how dominant they were. Because I remember throughout the entire year, I said like, okay, they're great, but can they capitalize in the playoffs? They were great all season long. They just added 2 guys who have proven to be playoff risers. They're not like elite, but they're 2 playoff risers. They improved their game in the playoffs. They can 100% win 60+ games. Like that's I don't think that's a question.
Yeah, and they. So what I was saying, I'm pretty sure they were 0.4 points away from being the number 2 defense last year. And they replaced Giddey and Jalen Williams, the center Jalen Williams, in their rotation with Alex Caruso and Isaiah Hartenstein. Like, I think they're going to be a Minnesota level defense next year. Like, in my opinion, Caruso's the best defensive guard in the league. Just across the board. Like, I don't think he's the best point of attack defender or the best at jumping lanes. But when you just check all the boxes, it's kind of like what we were talking about with Tatum. He's good at everything on defense. Caruso's good at everything on defense. Hartenstein adds a new layer. They didn't have a post defender last year. They didn't have a Jokic defender. He's probably one of the 5 or 7 players I'd take to defend Jokic in the league. And he's a big presence on the glass too. So you just drastically improved your number 4 defense. And did they really even get worse offensively when you also account for internal development from Shea, J-Dub, Chet? Like, they're going to get better. Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like, this is a great team. And like, if they just came out it reminds me of the leap the Warriors made from 2014 to 2015.
I like that one.
I wouldn't be surprised if the Thunder come out, win 66 games, and Shea's the MVP. Wouldn't surprise me at all.
66 might surprise me a little bit, but like, but yes, okay, if they won 60 games, 62, not surprising in the slightest, absolutely. Yeah, great stuff. One more thing I wanted to address that wasn't on the agenda. I did some digging. As someone who has an all-time top 100 list, as someone who's looked at all the top 100 lists ever, there was one person who has one player who was my favorite player, Al Horford, in their top 100 all time, and that's you. So I'll forever have your respect for that. And I really do. Yeah. So appreciate. I always love me some Al Horford love right there.
I love that. Yeah, I haven't updated that list in I think 2 years.
I think it's more actually like 29. I think it was 2020 that you made the list of maybe 21, maybe or something like that.
I think it was 21. I think it might have been 21. And I planned to revamp it because I did it as a video series back in the day.
Mhm.
And then I deleted the videos because I wasn't satisfied with how it came out.
Right.
And I planned to revamp it, but then I was
Mhm.
kind of like,
Yeah.
I don't know. That's more of a niche type of thing where it's like, I don't know if it would have as big of an audience. Kind of like with my player rankings, it's kind of
Right.
just like a niche for my fans.
Right.
And
Yeah.
the top 100. I think I really value just. A lot of people like to look at absolute peak and be like, this guy had an absolute peak that was so much better than this guy. But like for me, it's about the totality of a career. And a guy like Al Horford was an all-star level player 12 years ago and is still contributing to a contender. And that's a great career.
The starting center on a championship team, and I always like when I argue with this, I say like Al Horford at his peak was not a Hall of Fame player. However, he has had a Hall of Fame, a borderline Hall of Fame career. So that's the way that I like to look at it. But
well, in that same line of thinking, not to cut you off, but there were two other guys. Like if I were to remake the list, like there's two other guys that I think maybe would end up on it, kind of have the Al Horford boost. Drew Holiday and Mike Conley.
Mike Conley is an awesome one.
Mike Conley, he was good in like 2011, and he's still good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you definitely get done to make some edits to that list because I'm pretty sure Jokic is like at like 61. I think he's a little higher than 61.
Yeah, no, he'll definitely be. Yeah, if I revamp it, he'll definitely be higher than that.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Well, yeah, this great show. Ty, thanks so much for coming on. Yeah, as I mentioned, we definitely respect your brand and everything that you built. So yeah, congrats on reaching 100K the other day. But for everyone else, thanks so much for tuning into another episode of the All American Hoops podcast. Make sure to follow me on all social media platforms, All American Hooper on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Subscribe to @SportsFluence on YouTube to catch every episode Tuesdays at 6 o'clock. To look up SportsFluent Principy, where you can check out my merch and the other merch as well. This has been another episode of the All American Hoops podcast, and I hope everyone has a great night.